so quite a few years. Back then, I started a project called Mezzanine, which is what I'm going to talk about today. It's a CMS that's built with Django. I've given a few talks about Mezzanine before at different PyCons and things like that. They've been a lot more general, just about the history of it and the process around running an open source project. Today, given we're quite a Django specific audience, I thought I'd talk about how Mezzanine's actually implemented from a Django perspective. So looking at some of the models and views and things like that. I can actually do this talk because one of the guiding principles of Mezzanine compared to some similar projects is that it's actually really simple. Sort of shuns some advanced features for the sake of keeping the code quite simple and easy to understand. And so hopefully by the end of this talk you will have a rough idea, of, if you like, of how to go away and maybe build your own CMS using just these core concepts. So I've worked with quite a few CMSs. I've built a few different ones other than Mezzanine, and I see all of them as having two main user-facing features, and that is allowing the CMS user to control the hierarchy of the content throughout the site. And so typically, like with a website, that might be the navigation, primary navigation, click-through, secondary navigation, things like that. By the way, yeah, this is a picture of the CMS interface with all the pages in like a hierarchical tree there, and you can see this is the default site that you get out of there, and it's a bit hard to read those page names, but you get some hierarchical navigation there, the same nav there, and down the bottom to form a footer as well. The other main feature is having that navigation hierarchy point to different types of content that the CMS user can choose from. So I, as a CMS user, I should be able to arrange that navigation hierarchy, and I should be able to choose from a set of types of content that I can have that navigation point to. And that's the basic feature set of every CMS out there. So first we'll look at how to represent that hierarchy using Django. And again, with Mezzanine, the base page is, I've just got a bit of code here. And I've got lots of code samples throughout these slides that I've really, some of them are kind of pseudocode, they're not the exact code from Mezzanine, like it's just meant to illustrate some of the concepts. And so the foundation of Mezzanine is a page model, which I think all of the CMSs in Django have some variation of that actually. Some CMSs I've worked on and other ones that are out there, they're more advanced and they make this distinction between navigation and actual content. But again, in Mezzanine, we try and keep things really simplistic, and so there's no distinction there. Like a page in the navigation is explicitly tied to the actual content. And so the main way we implement the tree here is this part I've got highlighted here. There's just a parent foreign key to itself. So if you work with Django models, you can see that the primary navigation for the site would just be all the pages where parent is equal to null. If I wanted to get the secondary navigation that was tied to a particular parent, I'd pass that through to the query. We've got some niceties here around a page we can reference its children, and a page can also reference its parent. The page also has some other fields, just some basic things, and order, which is how we sort of, okay, we've got the primary navigation, how do we sort those 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At a real simple level, that could, in Django admin, that could just be text fields that the CMS user enters. In Mezzanine, we hide the field and you can drag and drop them, so they get a nice interface for that. But under the hood, it's just an integer field. Title of a page, the slug, what's the URL. Have this content model field, which I'll get to shortly, and that's sort of related to how we choose those different content types that I was talking about. So how do we navigate this tree of page objects and actually display the different levels of navigation? And if you work with Django a bit, there's quite a few different things out there that you can use to do something like this. There's a Django MPTT. We looked at that, and this is way back, in 2008 or 2009 or something, and we had some junior developers, and I was a little bit junior myself, and there's quite a lot of conceptual overhead in MPTT in order to understand what's actually going on, and it's not as simple as what we've done in Mezzanine. Again, this notion of simplicity, that someone can just crack open the hood and work out what's going on in a relatively straightforward way. So the crux of how we display navigation, this navigation tree, is a page menu template tag. This isn't the code for the template tag, but this is kind of pseudocode that demonstrates the algorithm we use to do it in a really efficient way. So if you look at that model we had before, you can kind of imagine, like, in the most naive way, if you wanted to render like a sitemap, you might say, give me all the page objects with a parent of null, and you might loop through those, and then as you're looping through those, you might say, give me all the pages with this as a parent, give me all the pages with this as a parent, depending on how many levels deep your site hierarchy goes. That would get quite expensive in SQL queries, and you probably have a really slow site without some kind of caching. So what Mezzanine does is it just creates this dictionary that represents the lists of branches pointing to their parent page ID. So we just build that one time on any page. We go through all the pages, and this dictionary just maps parent IDs to lists of pages. And so what this ends up looking like is that it's just parent ID, parent ID, parent ID is the keys, and each of the values in that dictionary are the lists of child pages for that. So then we can actually have, this is just a dummy function that would just print things out in a console you can see here. Then we have this recursive function basically where, if we called this with a hierarchy of pages, it would basically print out all the parents, and as we go through those parents, we just say if it exists in the structure we created initially, run it again, pass it through that page ID as the parent. And now I've just put like a little sort of indentation thing here, so it would print out a nice tree. And so the way a page menu actually works is it's a template tag. It's kind of like an inclusion tag, so you can pass it template files to use as the include when you're rendering one part of the navigation tree. And then in that template file, you then call page menu again and again, passing through each page. And if you're onto the secondary level, you might use a different template entirely. You might use the same template. So it's a pretty powerful way of having these recursive template tags that are inclusion tags that can render a part of that navigation tree or the entire navigation tree at once. So that's how we do the hierarchical content and the hierarchical navigation, and how we actually render that out. And when we do that, obviously all these pages, as we saw before with the page model, it's got a URL field, and that URL just points to, there's a catch-all URL pattern. It basically says and this is at the end of all our URL patterns in the actual Mezzanine Django project, and it's any slug that gets picked up by it goes to a single view, and that single view will just load the page for that slug and serve it up to a template. And I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. So that's how we do hierarchical navigation from a Django model perspective. Next I'll talk about how that second feature of all CMSs, how do we provide the CMS user with a way to choose different types of content that navigation will point to. Now the core API for the developer to provide this to the CMS user is by subclassing this page model. So I've just got a few examples here of some of the ones that Mezzanine provides by default, but ultimately as a developer using Mezzanine, you would create your own ones that are specific to the type of site you're trying to build. I mean, I've left out all the fields here, but they can be quite as simple as a rich text page, which just, it's just very common in a CMS. It's just a WYSIWYG field. It's just, I think, a text field with a nice widget on it, and they can just enter some content in there, and it's the most basic form of a page. Down to a really advanced example, which is this form model, which allows users in Mezzanine to actually, in the Django admin, build a form. So it's got this related model, which is actually all the form fields. They can add different text fields and date fields and multiple choice fields and things like that. And it's a really advanced example of how far you can take this really simple model in order to implement a custom content type. Gallery is pretty obvious. It's just got a collection of images on it. And there's also a cartridge application that leverages Mezzanine to provide e-commerce. It does the same thing here for its shop categories. So it allows the e-commerce administrator to build a hierarchy of store categories with products in them that the users of the website can buy into that hierarchical navigation. So let's look at how we work with these different content types in a generic way. How does that tie back to that base class of the page? So page does, I hope everyone can see that. Page does a bit of housekeeping on save. It automatically just sets that URL based on the title. This is a really common Django pattern. It sets this content model field, which was on the code example before. And then what it's actually doing here is it's looking at the name of the class, rich text page, the form page, whatever that is, and just storing it as a string against the page object. And so then if we were actually iterating through a whole bunch of pages, we then have this get content model method on there. And what it actually does is it just runs get attribute on itself using that string, which is what Django will do with the concrete inheritance. So if I had a page object that had a subclass and it was representing a subclass rich text page instant, you could go page.richTextPage.content, I think is the field name on there. The form object would be page.form.form fields. I'm just making that up now, but it would be a completely different field that doesn't exist on a rich text page. And this allows us to do that in a generic way. We've also got this static method here that probably doesn't need to be a static method, get content models, and basically that allows us to query all the different types of page subclasses. It just looks through Django's get models function. I think that might have changed, and basically says if the model isn't actually page and it's a subclass of page. So then we get an actual list that we can programmatically interact with, rich text page, form page, things like that. And here's that admin interface again, and you can and so I'll just talk a little bit about this. And this is actually, Django admin. This looks a little bit different, but this is Django admin. We'll talk about that a bit more shortly. But you've got your list interface for a model. You've got your change interface for a model. What the admin classes do around page is they provide this custom interface for the listing interface for the page model, and then each of these actually points to the change view for those different model types, the rich text page, form page, etc. There's no actual change interface for the page model, and there's no actual list interface for the gallery page or the form page. So this kind of brings all those things together into the end user what looks like one admin interface. So if I was to go add rich text page, I'd get that WYSIWYG field. If I was to go add gallery, I'd get a Django admin change interface with where I could upload images and things like that. so with that page menu template tag, and I talked about how we can use that recursively to generate the navigation for the site, and those links point to that URL field, and there's a catch-all view. So you might be wondering, like, how do we display different content types? That view actually looks at that content model field and says, I'm going to serve up the template for that particular type of model. And so you can see, hopefully there, that that's the end-to-end round trip of how do I provide those two core features to the CMS user. How do I let them, and I think this is a really, at least going back when I started working with Django, I came from a background of CMSs like this, and I couldn't really wrap my head around how can I take Django with it's Django admin, and it's really tied to this relational database and a real crud interface, list, edit. Like, if I'm building a simple site that's just got a few main navigation items, like, sure, I can hard code those in templates, and I can build just regular Django apps and views and models and load those, and that's really nice and simple. But when you get into a larger scale site where the site administrators actually want to manage that navigation, it's like, how do you tie it all together? And so hopefully that provides a bit of a picture of, like, how can I let an admin user control the structure of the whole site and choose from a whole bunch of different things? And obviously these templates then know how to deal with the models that you've implemented that match up to them. And as an added bonus, Mezzanine touts this as seamless integration with third-party Django apps, and it's a bit of a whatever. But if you add pages, you can see with this model, if you add pages through that interface that have URLs that point to URL patterns of an existing Django app in the project, it just works. So in actual fact, there's a blogging application in Mezzanine, and it's got nothing to do with these pages. It's just a stock standard, here's a blog model, here's a view, here's some URL patterns, here's some templates. And so by default, we create I think it's a rich text page. We set its URL to the same URL pattern that's matched by this blog application. And Mezzanine actually then, in the admin interface, protects that URL from being changed. It actually detects that this is actually pointing to like a real URL pattern. The admin user shouldn't be able to come along and change that because they'll break it. So for Django admin, I won't really go through the code, but it's really worth talking about it a bit. I did a talk a couple of years back at this SyDjango meetup about the missing manual of Django admin, and I think, you know, as you sort of evolve with Django, you start out with the Django admin, and then I think a lot of people find it hard to customize. They hit a few different walls, and they're like, I've seen this happen like on open source projects and proprietary projects as well, and they're like, no, we don't want to use Django admin. Like, it's just this basic CRUD app. It doesn't really suit our needs, and so let's go and reinvent the wheel and waste 6 months of development time and a month each time we want to add a new feature. But my honest opinion is, and you know, I've spent quite a bit of time on this, is that you can make the Django admin do anything if you work out the hacks and the hooks, and you can templatize the whole thing, change all the CSS. You don't have to stick to this strict model of a list interface, a change interface, just as we can see here with the page tree. You can make, Mezzanine provides this singleton admin that actually just lets you have a module that goes straight to a single record for a particular model, and there's no listing interface, which is kind of handy. Provides a lot of custom views like this. One of the sort of nitpicks I had with the Django admin originally is that you get that big dashboard that's explicitly tied to your app and model structure when you log in. And that's kind of nice as a landing page, as a shortcut to get to places. But once you're like 3 levels deep into some interface inside Django admin, for the non-technical user, it's like, oh, well, how do I get back to this section now? I've got to go back to the home page. All Django admin really needs is a nice constant navigation there that allows you to get to all the sections. So Mezzanine actually provides you with, there's a setting that lets you define what this navigation is, and it's really just the same as the standard Django admin dashboard that you see when you log in with all the models and things like that, but just allows you to rename them and group them in different ways, which is, yeah, really handy. Mezzanine provides, I was talking about this page tree, so you can drag and drop these things here. We actually provide drag and drop features for, I think they're called inline admin classes, so you can reorder things like that. And my main point is here that don't throw out Django admin, don't discount it, and the more you hack on it, the easier it gets, and you can really do lots with it. And the sad point is there's projects out there, there's some different CMS projects, and they shun the admin, but then you lose all the third-party Django applications. They've got nice admin classes. They'll plug straight into here, and they'll look nice, and they'll come up in here. And yeah, there's a lot of wasted effort there, I think. And last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of just a basic CMS with Django is CMS users. They want a way to just tweak some knobs, change settings, and Django settings. Oh, I like it. Everyone craps on it like it's this singleton object, and it's really inflexible. I think it works well. And so what we've done with Mezzanine is we've taken django.conf.settings and we've kind of put it on steroids. And what we do here in Mezzanine is we have this this pattern where in each of your applications you have a defaults.py. It works in the same way. It's probably not a good name. It should have been settings.py, but anyway. Works in the same way admin.py does. So there's like I don't even know if this still exists in Django anymore, but once upon a time there was an admin.autodiscover or something, and that would just iterate through all the installed apps and to make sure that your admin classes get picked up. So the same thing happens with Mezzanine and these defaults.py, and you just call register setting. And it's basically the same as sticking a setting in your settings.py. Installed apps equals a list of strings, right? But with this API here, we're able to provide a bit more metadata. We can give these settings a label. We can define whether it's editable by the CMS user, and we can provide a default value, which is what you'd be doing if you set it in settings.py. And the nice thing about this is that we get this custom interface where those settings are actually typed in that the system knows that it's a string or a list or an integer or something, or a boolean in fact. And then so we generate just a normal Django form based off all those settings, and the ones that were defined as true or false as their default value, they get checkbox. Those labels and descriptions come out here, and it provides that last piece of the puzzle for the CMS user to be able to say, I just want this tagline at the bottom of the site, and I want it to be able to change it every few weeks or something like that. I want a checkbox here where I can hide this panel on Sundays, which you could do programmatically, so that's a bad example. But users want these knobs, and it's just a really easy way to do it. I've just got a little snippet down here, so the last bonus of this settings system we implement, it actually proxies to Django conf settings. So we everywhere throughout Mezzanine, we go from Mezzanine conf import settings, settings.installed apps, just picks it up from Django settings, settings.account approval required, which was the one back here. It's been changed to true by a checkbox here. So that's a nice thing for CMS users, for developers, sorry, to be able to add these little knobs to the CMS that the administrators can use to change things. We also expose a white list of settings to templates. So in templates, you can do things like if settings.account approval required, show some text here or not. And just quickly, the things I didn't cover here, because these are all, Mezzanine's got like a kitchen sink philosophy, but these are all things that you could get out of third-party Django apps. But what we really tried to do from the start with Mezzanine is prevent you from having to take all these third-party Django apps and making sure that they work together in a cohesive way by providing that basic functionality in the project itself. So keywords, ratings, threaded comments, search, multilingual accounts, multi-tenancy, so you can run a whole bunch of different sites in the one running Django instance, which was really hard to do way back in the day. Thumbnailing, lots of caching tools, bootstrap templates by default. People want to have a nice site to start with. Some developers do, some don't actually. Ways to deploy it. So we, it's really geared towards the newcomer to Django. And deploying, like I could talk about it for hours. If you deploy Django sites, it's just heinous. And so we provide some fabric files that you take a default Ubuntu machine and provision all the stuff on there and give you a way of deploying Mezzanine sites. There's e-commerce via cartridge. We've built sort of a forum app using some of these features called Drum, and a whole bunch of themes as well that the community have put together. And there's about 70 or so third-party packages up on djangopackages.com that people have put together for Mezzanine, which is really exciting. And there's been a ton of websites that people have built with it. So yeah, it's opinionated, and some people love it, some people hate it, but obviously it's working for some people. And that's it. I hope you can sort of see the basic concepts that are used to implement it. And if you so happen to hate Mezzanine, you could go away and build something similar, hopefully. That's it. Thank you.
The whole document model is trying to be squeezed into relational database structure, where clearly it's hierarchy. And if you use the hierarchical database to store all of the document content,
yeah, you're right.
Go away. So if you're doing things now, you'd be looking to pop a hierarchical database or like some layers around Mongo or Couch or something to do the NoSQL case grabs of everything and hashes and all of that kind of thing.
Yep, that's a really good point.
Object database that should be solved all of those problems 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to that, I would say Mezzanine wasn't designed to be a CMS product. It's not trying to compete with WordPress or some of these larger CMSs. Mezzanine is designed to give you CMS features because you want to use Django and you love Python and you love Django, and I do. And back when I started this, I was dead set on Django. But the place I was working for was an agency, big customers, and we could not just give them the Django admin. We were really confident on Django as a rapid way to build the types of sites we wanted to build. And we charge by the hour, and well, we charge by, we said this is how long we think it's going to take. If we start using Django, it's actually going to take this long, and we make a lot more money. We love Python. Django had just come out, and we're like, okay, this is where we're going to go. We need a proper CMS though. What are we going to do? At the time there was a thing called Django Page CMS, and we used that for a few projects. It was a bit brittle, and I think Django CMS is a fork of that, and was probably started around the same time as Mezzanine. So you're absolutely right, but we're not trying to build the perfect CMS with a matching database. We're stuck in this. Not stuck. We're in this relational database world because we want to use Django, and I don't think this isn't painful. How we do this. It's. I mean, we saw that pseudocode for like pulling out the tree and representing it in a way where we can show branches with constant time access without having to smash the database. And it's not. It's not tons of code. Actually, it is tons of code, because we've added all these little things on it. But you can see the basic algorithm. It's pretty straightforward. So, yeah, there's a slight mismatch there, but it's
building, and you know, a whole lot of custom theming and everything else. But Mezzanine provides all of these models out of the box, and they're sort of part of Mezzanine, although Mezzanine sort of copies them into your project space, whatever. But yeah, my question is, how do you manage updates and allowing smooth transitions between versions of Mezzanine when devs have made all these changes to the models and other things that Mezzanine provides?
Yeah, so we've historically, I mean, I'm not sure if this is quite the answer you're looking for. It's a broad question. There are a gazillion little touch points that could somehow break, you know, as time evolves, right? It's like how long is a piece of string? Historically, I mean, the bulk of work on Mezzanine, it's been pretty feature complete for like at least what I want from a simple CMS. It's been done for a few years, but development has continued over the last few years, primarily just keeping up to pace with each Django version. And we've supported, like, I think at one time we were supporting about 4 different Django versions, and it was really hard work. We had, if this Django do this, if this Django do this, if this Django do this. So that's kind of just one particular data point around the attention given to backwards compatibility, and trying to have those things work in a smooth way. At the end of the day, you know, some of the other CMS projects out there, they're born from design agencies that the CMS, I think, to some extent, is a product of the design agency in order to make money. And so they can actually, for them to, and this is the point I'm getting at here, is a resource one, okay? They've got developers and they pay them to work on these projects. That's good and bad, right? Like, there's more resources that go to those projects. In the other way, it's bad. What if that business goes up? What if those developers leave? Whereas Mezzanine, it's been entirely community volunteer driven for the last 6 or so years. So that's good in terms of, I mean, myself at least and some of the core team, we've been working on this that whole time, not because we're making money off it or if it benefits a particular business we have, but because we want to have a good CMS out there that's free. That's the good side of that. The bad side of that is that sometimes it's hard for us to have a very rigorous process around releasing, and it's, the short of it is, it's pretty ad hoc sometimes, and things break, and given that it's an entirely community-driven product, we rely on people to test these things out. I mean, on the mailing list, I don't know if you've seen that before, but I'll be sending emails months in advance. Hey guys, this is looking like what will be the next version of Mezzanine. If you've got a complex project out there, please help out. This is an entirely community-driven project. I'm not sitting here getting paid for this. Please help out in reporting any issues you see, and even better, invest the time to look at Mezzanine and say, okay, well, how can this work in a way that will make this upgrade seamlessly? So it's not perfect. Some things break, but you know, it is definitely a best effort given the amount of resources.
But also, this is why it's so important to write regression tests, right? So if you write the most shitty regression test that only instantiates an instance of your model, that's enough. So next time I upgrade to Django, do my regressions work, you'll discover immediately what you need to do around it. So if you don't do much with your regression tests at all, other than whatever, then it's perfect for understanding what your issues are for
That's
upgrades.
A really good point, yeah.
So that's outside of projects, and certainly upgrades have nothing to do with Mezzanine. So important to write. Even the simplest of regression tests, you'll discover loads of reasons why they're a good idea.
And we've got a ton of tests in Mezzanine, but the other side of that coin is that they're only ever as good as the bugs you've seen. There's always going to be things that are unaccounted for in the tests, and Mezzanine, it's such a broadly scoped project. Like, it's not this one little small utility that does one particular little task, right? It's like it's doing a couple of hundred different things all at once, and so it's almost impossible to account for every permutation of how someone's actually going to use it. So we just can't foresee every issue.
That's why the regressions are so important. Even say going from Python 2.7 to 2.8 or simple things like that. They've got nothing to do with Mezzanine that it could stop your application from working. So that's why you have the regression test.
That's very true. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. This is not really a question, but it's more. So I use Mezzanine a lot. Like most of the websites that we do at my company are Mezzanine based. My memory is really bad, so I don't really remember all the questions that I have. But these two questions have come last week, which is I wish there was a really easy way to paginate edit comments because they're not paginated, and also your orderable class doesn't really work with dynamic inlines. I wish that was something that worked.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it's. The threaded comments, that would be a good addition. You're right, it doesn't have that.
Which is, it's pretty weird, because pagination is, built into Mezzanine. And it's like, why is it not there for comments?
I guess it's just one missing feature. So I would ask you to, contribute that, get involved in. There's lots of people in the mailing list that, if you've got questions about how things should be, and don't be afraid to. Sometimes we're a bit short and blunt on the mailing list, and again, it's this issue of the resource and the time available is such a hard problem in open source when there's emails just coming in every day. Can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? And you've got a day job and this and family. So sometimes I feel a bit rude, but I always suggest to people, if this is something you want to see, be a part of it. The other one, what was the other one?
So the dynamic inlines, like stack dynamic.
That sounds like a bug. That should probably work. I think
that. Auditable, so you can't order them, and it's I tried it, doesn't work. It doesn't stand up to location, so you can't use auditable.
Okay.
Yeah,
sounds like a feature there. I'm not sure. I mean, you should send an email to the mailing list, and we can have a look at that. It sounds weird. Thanks, sir. You should also, if you're doing a bunch of sites, I'd love to add them on here, so let us know, and we'll put them up there. This is actually generated from a gallery on the website. There's just like a list in the readme, and it generates that. So, yeah.
Just going back to the multiple projects aspect, how much thought was put into, so you're obviously the project idea is to make changes in the project itself, but if you've got multiple projects and you've got many of the same hacks across projects, do you have any recommendations of how to do that, or how you would set that up? So sort of more like reusability of some of the changes that you made. So, for instance, there's like adding different page types, or even removing them, for instance. You might want that across several of your projects.
So you're talking about changes you've made to your own version of Mezzanine yourself?
In the project that can affect Mezzanine.
Right, okay. So in your actual repo for your particular project, you've got certain tweaks to Mezzanine, and you actually want to use those across multiple projects, completely different code bases. I guess if the particular type of thing you're dealing with lends itself to this, you somehow make that a package you can use.
I'm
If
not
it's
sure how much thought has been input or invested in those sort of.
well, I would say, you know, there's people have done that a lot with the packages, and a lot of these are born out of me saying no. I don't want to maintain this code in Mezzanine. Again, the resourcing is really hard, and I said, look, this will make a great package. Then you can maintain it yourself. You can, you know, it sort of adds to your open source brand, for lack of a better term. Go ahead and release this. We'll promote it. We'll add it to the documentation. Yeah, I guess it sounds. You kind of mentioned hacks, so.
Well, it could be implemented something.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's a specific type of Django, like a lot of things, you know, they're not. They might just be Django specific, and you know you open yourself up to broader popularity with your own open source then as well, which is something I sort of try and push people to do. I think it's a really good thing.
And is there any new features coming up?
Yeah, like I said, like as for a simple, I mean, this multilingual content, that was a really big recent feature this year. It's actually integration with Django model translation, but we kind of had this philosophy from the start. I talked before about this notion of batteries included, like Python and Django. If something's pretty simple to build, and all of these things are, there's third-party counterparts that are probably better. But if we can build something simple enough that fits the bill of a particular piece of functionality, let's do our own way. And it's the opposite mindset of, I don't know if you've heard this in Pinax, that was not, I think it's kind of died, I'm not sure, but it was really popular back in when we started this, and took the opposite approach, like everything's a separate installed app, and they can all be used in a Django project, the blog and the forum and all these things. And what we really wanted to do is provide a complete system. People can just take this, have basic CMS, bang out a basic site for like small to medium businesses. But yeah, it kind of reached that use case functionally a few years back, like I said, and now it's kind of it's not in maintenance mode. Like people do come up with a few little nice features here, like the pagination on the comments. That'll be a nice new little feature if that comes along. But I'm not actively. There's no roadmap, and again, it ties back to this this problem of sets of hands. You know, yeah, it's a very hard thing to solve.